to just give a few sound bites initially of this report. So the Q2 23 patronage is back up beyond post-COVID levels. I'd like to also mention in this quarter, the end of August, we launched a Meteor service, which is a 15-minute frequency going west to east. And just to share, as I have to hand, and they haven't been included specifically in the report, but for day one of the Meteor service running, and this replaced the Silverdale and Frankton services, we had 904 passengers. And if we look out to September, and we're only midway through, we've carried just about 22,000 passengers. And if we were to compare that back to what the Silverdale and Frankton services had been carrying for a similar period. Sorry. For a month, we were looking at just over 1,000 passengers, so substantially more, with the Meteor service there. Yes, so that, yes, and that's 15 days in September, compared to 30 days of August of 1,000 passengers on the Frankton and Silverdale. Yeah, the frequency is obviously 15-minute now, but just wanted to share those initial stats.
Thank you, Trudy. Angela?
Yeah, I mean, that's great news. How are we communicating that? That's fantastic. And when's the next one coming? Rototuna rocket?
We're working on it.
Thank you.
And the other thing I'd just like to mention is the World Car Free Day, which is 22nd of September. So Council has taken a collaborative approach with HCC and all of the district councils around the region to ensure that we really get behind this initiative this year. In the past, it's usually been city-centric, so have taken messaging from around the table and bringing that into fruition, and we'll report back how that goes. In terms of promotion, complimentary tickets, but also working with our corporate concession holders as well to promote that day and onboard more people if we can. So that's it. That's all from me. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for Trudy? Yes, Maxine.
Thanks, Trudy. Truly amazing numbers. I'm just blown away by that. And clearly it is the frequency that people are wanting to see and then use. So great work, and let's bring it more and more and more, actually, and something that Hamilton City Council just in terms of the Meteor, and that's good news. Have we had any other feedback from any of the passengers or early feedback from community around Meteor at all?
Through the chair, Councillor Maxine. Look, we've had some feedback from residents just in terms of actually some of the infrastructure and some of the challenges there, which we're working closely with HCC to remedy. A little bit of house shaking is to be mentioned there on a couple of the streets. So working with HCC to remedy that infrastructure. But overall, the transition of passengers from that Silverdale and Frankton services, we see the volume of people, particularly at the transport centre, doing the transfers. We have people lined up on that Bryce Street, those Bryce Street stops, significant numbers, which is homage in the initial days, that the message has definitely been received.
And a good marketing campaign in the lead up to it, I think, which really helped people understand it being offered. Also then on your World Car Free Day activity, has there been any approach to the Hamilton Central Business Association in order to promote it? I mean, promotion's a really good way to be able to get pick up and people to know about it rather than it just being on the day.
Through the chair, look, we've started from something fairly basic. So this is a building block into what we can be doing in future years. Initially, we've worked strongly with our corporate concession holders. So that's the likes of Genesis, WRC, University of Waikato, Wintec, to name a few. But we are also looking to work in with sort of the economic development space, which HCC hold a significant team there. And I see that as an opportunity, as you say, to start bridging that business interface.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Kevin, then Claire.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Item 24, 25, I see the 12 seaters to be delivered. I'm sure it's already there. I'm sure I saw one wandering around Taupo just recently. I'd be surprised if it wasn't. In terms of the electric vehicle, I know the date's been pushed back a couple of times. Is there an expectation we'll have a launch and celebration of that in Taupo? And if so, can I get you to connect with staff there on that, please?
So through
a request from them. Yep. The other small query around patronage, just wondering where the numbers for the Turangi link are, and my understanding from staff is that that has received very high patronage, so it's a good news story, with the potential that we may need some additional capacity there. I'll just leave that with you. If I can get you to connect with Claire at Taupo would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Claire?
Yes, thanks to the chair. I was interested in the corporate concessions as well. Yeah. I'd like to know how they actually work, like, because I'd love to see corporates committing to this and not just limiting their payments to the council based on their current patronage, but on the potential. Yeah. So at the moment, I couldn't really tell from the wording under 18 whether or not you keep a record of who actually uses the services and you reimburse. I guess you get a top up from, say, Genesis from the actual users, or whether you say based on the residency, or like where your workers are actually living, say 20% of them could be using the bus, so therefore we'd like you to pay 20%, yeah, of your payroll to us, yeah, so, or 20% of that concession, yeah, or is it based simply on the actual usage, which doesn't actually incentivize that business to try and get more people using the bus?
Through the chair, just in response, the way we structure these initiatives is through a memorandum of understanding with the individual corporates. Generally speaking, it is anchored to a bucket of money. So there is a budget that the corporate has ring fence to support this initiative. Often these initiatives are underpinned by their sustainability policies, and we're finding that you know, we are council is being approached more in terms of having those open discussions and where we can come into play there. In terms of how it works, it is on usage and monitoring the fund through the year with a 3-month review if the fund were required to be topped up, etc., or another conversation to be had. I must just point out though, in the past, often it was set at 25%, but council have suggested that a 50% contribution starts to bring about a compelling argument for getting staff away from using their cars to using the bus service, as well as to Huia. And we see that with Genesis having organisations in, you know, in both cities.
I'm really encouraged by that. Thank you very much. And I guess it's incumbent on us who are trying to get more corporates involved in this space to really encourage them to get their sustainability policies, set in place and set ambitious targets for this kind of, public transport goal. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. How's that? So I've had a couple of conversations recently with some members of the community who have mentioned how the designs of the buses in Hamilton differ. And so some of the buses that they've used on the Comet route have not been accessible to them. And so I'm just wondering how come some of the buses are different, and yeah, can you comment on that?
Through the chair, thanks, Ollie. Look, I can confirm that all of the buses that we had procured from 2016 are RUB compliant and are low floor accessible buses. I would be interested to understand the details of where that doesn't appear to be the case in terms of what you've presented here today, but I can confirm that all buses in the Waikato fleet are RUB compliant, and that does mean that they have 2 wheelchair bays as well as low floor, and accessible to those that require it.
So through the chair, the problem seems to be that the size of the wheelchair bays differ, and some of the seats don't appear to fold away, so they're unable to get their wheelchair into the space and had to sit in the aisle.
Through the chair, as part of the monitoring of the fleet, we do an independent fleet audit of which those characteristics are checked. But what I would like to suggest today is if there are specific experiences, for those to be feedback, and we can absolutely work with the operator to ensure that all components that come into play in those wheelchair bays are working. They should be. There's no tolerance there. We do have a rigid expectation on in-vehicle.
Yeah, thanks for your report. I'm just wondering if you take the patronage, like I'm talking specifically more about that trauma. I think there's 3,000 passengers have used it. It's really good. It had a great launch. It was in all local papers, all local social media. So I don't know what more you can do to get people on it. But do you have it specific, like how many people hop on at Tikawiti or how many hop on at Otaronga, or is it just over the whole? My sort of theory behind it is when it's only a trial at the moment, so when it comes back for us to give it more funding to keep it going, you know, you're going to get the odd person. You need to know how many people in our town are using it or our district, rather than everyone may be hopping on it in Kiki for all I know. So yeah.
Through the chair, we do have the ability to provide the information by stop, and also depending if the passengers are using B card, we can also understand some travel patterns. As you're saying, you know, are they travelling the entire journey, or is it, you know, a part of that journey? So absolutely can provide that information.
Angela?
Thank you. Yeah, there's been some great points raised so far. I just wanted to touch on corporate concessions. Great to see corporates and educational facilities coming on board. Just wondering how we're going in the council space. I know that, you know, staffing is quite hard to retain, and adding, you know, this sort of thing to a employee package could be quite a good way to give benefits to employees that aren't that financially cumbersome on council. So it's probably more operational than governance. Have we been working with our partner councils behind the scenes?
Through the chair, that is one of the conversations that we are putting into our outreach program, which we're developing at the moment. So yes, is the short answer.
And just on, if I may, Chair, on Oliver's points about the buses, as our contracts come up within Hamilton moving forward, it would be great to, you know, have Ollie's input on that procurement and making sure that they are wheelchair comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and Trudy and Catherine. I think there's no other questions, so we've got a resolution there that will move that the report, Regional Public Transport Operations and Performance Monitoring, be received. Can I have a mover, please? Thanks, Kevin. Seconder, Rodney. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, our next on the agenda is we've got Reid, I think, because James isn't here, from the MOE. So welcome, Reid. No doubt you'll have plenty of questions. What's gone through the committee already now, so we'll let you crack away. Yep, just the right-hand one.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Kia ora koutou. Ko Reid ni kora aho, and I am the Senior Regional Transport. Pull it closer again. Is that better? Wonderful. I am the Senior Regional Transport Advisor for the Ministry of Education, Te Tahuhu o Te Mātauranga, covering the Waikato and Auckland Central, South and East areas, managing our transport operations on the ground. James gives his apologies this morning. Unfortunately, with the weather out of Wellington, he was a bit fraught there, so I will do my best. Anyway, so the ministry provides a range of school transport assistance services, and is around providing assistance, transport assistance to caregivers where distance is a barrier, as well as in instances where there may be other underlying special education requirements that students need extra assistance to get to school. Through those, we provide a range of contracted services as well as funded services through the ministry. So we provide daily school bus services, which are what I manage on the ground every day. We contract buses that take students through to technology for year 7 and 8s. And we also have our special education school transport assistance service, which is for our students who have higher learning needs or disabilities that they require additional assistance to get through to school. Next slide, please. As well as contracting our own services, we provide bulk funding for a number of different avenues. So in some instances, schools receive bulk funding from us to provide their own transport assistance services. So this is bulk funding that we review annually, as well as we provide funding to Kura Kaupapa Māori to deliver their own services or provide some type of transport assistance that may be financial, and as well as that we have funding that we provide directly to caregivers that they can use towards their transport costs. And students can receive a conveyance allowance as well as a seat on the school bus. It just depends on where they live and their distance barrier to school. So to be eligible for school transport assistance from the Ministry of Education, we have 3 criteria that students must meet. One of those being that they need to be attending their closest state or state integrated school that they can freely enrol at. So of course we take into consideration enrolment zones implemented by the ministry. They have to live certain distances away from school. So for primary school students up to year 8, they must live 3.2 kilometres or further to be eligible for our distance transport assistance. And then for secondary school students, it is 4.8 kilometres. And of course, there is the caveat there that there is no suitable public transport available. We categorise school suitable public transport, as you can see on the slide, as that students walk no further than or are transported no further than 2.4 kilometres from their home to that appropriate public bus stop or bus route. And then on the other end, they do not travel more than 2.4 kilometres from that bus stop through to that appropriate school. We also have some caveats in there around timetabling, which Catherine spoke to before in relation to the Tamahere and Mātangi services, of which students need to be at school before school starts. There can't be more than one changeover, and their journey doesn't start before 7 a.m. in the morning. We do have the ability to transport students who fall outside of our school transport assistance eligibility criteria. So that means that they may live too close to their closest school. And basically there are some conditions that we provide our transport service providers with that they can meet to transport ineligible students. But that is a business decision for that transport service provider. Whether or not they wish to enact ineligible transport is up to them. That goes for the same for directly resourced schools as well. They can choose, they have the same contractual availabilities to provide transport to students who may otherwise be ineligible. So the ministry is funded through Vote Education. Our appropriation is based off of our policy in terms of who we give our funding to and how we receive that. And that policy is what I spoke to earlier, which is our eligibility criteria. So that is how we determine where our appropriation from the government goes. As you'll see highlighted there, we have no discretion or mandate to modify that policy. It is a cabinet process to amend where our how much funding we get based on those policy settings. And we also have no availability to transfer funding to other central government agencies based on the way that that is structured. And we recognise that this is something of a difficulty, especially in relation to how regional councils are funded and the process for that funding in relation to Waka Kotahi. So a lot of what we hope to do and what we hope we've demonstrated through the what you would have heard from Catherine this morning is having a collaborative approach with regional councils to make sure that where the ministry finds that there is an instance where we are operating outside of our mandate for funding, that we are giving our communities as much time and working with the likes of the regional councils to provide a solution that's in line with what can be provided. So this slide just highlights that we review our transport services regularly, and that is where a lot of these, if I focus on suitable public transport, comes to light, where there have been changes over time that either the ministry hasn't been aware of or it's historical. And this is where it highlights for us that there is a need for us to collaborate and work with other parties to resolve some type of transport arrangement that's been in place. So that can come through from schooling network changes, the opening of new schools, closing example, as well as through school requests for funding or route reviews. And again, just as I've spoken through those other couple of slides, really we're keen on a collaborative approach. And I think that we've demonstrated that well with the Waikato Regional Council through some of these engagements around Mātangi and Tamahiri areas, and how that doesn't work within the ministry's criteria for us to withdraw our services at this stage, but it just shines a light that if things were to develop in the future, that we will work together to make sure that these communities are well informed about what that means if things were to develop. Any questions?
Thank you, Reid. Any questions for Reid?
I've got a question.
Yeah, Rodney.
Reid, we've got a situation in our district, or ours and the neighbouring district, where the school bus apparently is going to get shut off next year. Well, it's under review anyway. This Kinahaku school. Yeah, so basically it's gone from, they changed the routes around, so it was 6 kids. And the school want to change the route, so there's be 9 kids, but they'd have to change the route too much. So basically my understanding is that the bus is driving right past a few kids, but because it's not on the actual route, he's not able to pick them up, so he's got to go to the other route. Then there isn't the 8, you've got to have 8 kids to go. In the rural areas, there's like not public transport, there's not very good footpaths, there's actually no footpaths. The only place it would be quite good to ride a horse, I suppose, because it's not that busy. So we get the horse lady back. But it's yeah, a little bit hard, you know, and education's very important. But especially at that young age and the communities, you know, it's basically, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, sort of, yeah, the criteria, whether it should be more flexible, let the school decide rather. I don't know how you do your funding, but yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, in that specific example with Kinohaku School, unfortunately, when they came to us and asked to look at their school bus to change it for where the majority of their students are living now, it was highlighted that they had less than 8 eligible students in a particular geographical area. I mean, our bus routes to be viable from a cost perspective have to have the numbers of students available so that our costs aren't too high, because our costs are worked out shared across the number of students who use those services. So the threshold for us, and has it always been, is 8. And we discussed that with Kinohaku School, and we provided a leeway, I suppose, where we acknowledged that there were only 7 at the time, and we offered the school the opportunity to grow those numbers in that. And, you know, because we understand that it is a rural community. You know, I've been there myself, I understand. Where it's at now is that we have to consider, has enough time passed that the school has been given a good enough opportunity to increase those student numbers? And there hasn't been a decision on that yet. We've consulted with the school around their views, as well as the local ministry office around, well, what do they think we should be doing? And we're going to be deliberating that this week. All of these types of decisions are not made by a single manager for us. We have what's called a route review committee, and all of these escalated along with the concerns of our regional officers, the schools. We've also received correspondence from the local mayor, Johnson, I believe. So we will be highlighting those to our committee of managers for a resolution, which may be that we maintain it for a further period of time. We understand a new principal has just been appointed, or they may decide that there has been enough time. I suppose one key thing to highlight here is that we provide a form of assistance function to caregivers to help meet their obligations. And so that can be either a seat on a school bus where it is viable, or it could be another form of assistance like a payment. And we kind of have to balance that out against the costs of a route overall, and that stewardship, I suppose, for public funds, because this is what it is. I hope that answers your question. May not have.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I think, you know, I've got a trucking business, and I think you probably make the per head cost around in the city where you've got full buses. Sometimes you've got to subsidise where you've got not many people. And my thinking, put it to you in my truckie way, because that's the way I always think. When we go and cart a farmer's one bull, we actually lose money. We've got to do those little jobs because we do get big jobs when we cart as 400 cows. So I think in a business like because basically that's what you are in the transport business is carting people. There's going to be the odd little area, but you still got to provide the service. Can you understand where I'm coming from?
Yes, I can. And I'd just like to add as well that I think it's important for it to be realised that, you know, we are predominantly in rural areas. You know, I can count on my hand the number of services that I actually operate in Hamilton City and less in Auckland because of the availability of public transport. So we and I are acutely aware of those situations for our rural communities. So we don't take it lightly.
Thanks. Good. You'll be agreeing with the keeping of the bus on. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodney. We'll go to online with Councillor Osborne, then we'll go to Claire and Angela.
Thank you, Reid, and thank you, Rodney. I'm just advocating again on the same subject for Kinahaku, which is at the southern area of Karakia Harbour. Just noting also that some of the other characteristics of these really remote rural areas is the distance that it is to purchase any kind of fuel. So these caregivers on this route have a 90-kilometre trip to purchase petrol or diesel. And these are also people who are generally working on farms. So, you know, you're talking about taking one bus route and replacing it with 12 return journeys. And that particular bus route, the extension, the reinstatement of what had been a bus route previously, it's still got the bus route signs up there. It will be a bus route of 9 children. So just really asking you to, you know, think about the social impact on our rural communities. If families can't get their kids to school, they're not going to take the jobs on the farms, and we're just going to have another nail in the coffin for our rural areas. All those kids are not going to attend school, and we're going to end up with all sorts of social problems. So just please advocating for our really remote rural communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Claire?
Yes, thanks. I was going to ask a more general question actually about your policies and criteria, because there was no mention of consulting with iwi generally. Like you do mention the Te Kura kaupapa schools, but I mean just for a school that isn't in that category, are you obliged to take into account the impacts that it might have on local Māori, particularly, you know, when you're looking at equity and access? I guess I mean, we've heard some really eloquent arguments for Kinahaku, but I mean, just generally, is that part of your policy framework that you do have to take into account impacts on Māori who are in that lower socioeconomic echelon, and that it might have pretty severe consequences for them if they can't quite meet your criteria?
So the short answer is no in relation to is that part of our policy and guideline structure. However, I think it's important to note that as a wider ministry, that is a focus, and we work closely with our regional staff to ensure that where there may be an impact of a service removal, which is unlikely. Oh no, I won't go down that track. But we work with our local staff to ensure that there are other supports in place. So while we may not be able to provide a physical service, we still provide a type of funding to those caregivers. There is an option there, for example, for that to be pulled by the board, and then we can work with the board around, well, what are the legislative requirements for providing a service that they own and that they run. So we provide, I suppose, other types of assistance or care to awhi those communities to make sure that there isn't that decline.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'll try and keep it pretty broad so I don't inflict myself. Yeah, just find it interesting that we talk about partnering and collaboration, but yet the funding can't follow. You know, no ability to transfer funding to other central or local government agencies just seems quite short-sighted. I was just wondering how long has it been since that's been reviewed? Be my first question. And also some of those distances are quite large for children these days to possibly be expected to walk. Anyway, that's aside. I was just wondering, you know, we've heard from people so far about the rural communities and yeah, advocate for what has been said already. But as a council, you know, we're looking at climate considerations as well. I was just wondering, is there a climate lens on your policies as well? So sorry, a few questions so far. Because, and also we've had a mandate from our wider region to really increase our PT that we're providing, and it seems conflicted with what we're trying to do and with what the ministry is possibly pulling back from. And what does worry me when you say at this stage those bus services in the Waikato district south of Hamilton are being affected. One question that I would like you to answer today would be, I sit on the Future Proof PT subcommittee and the Future Proof full committee, and through processes and hearings over the last 3 or 4 years, you know, we talked to Kāinga Ora, we talked to everyone else, and just seems like ministry is slightly silent in that forward planning, working with councils around residential growth, industrial growth, you know, housing, employment. So just wondering, how does the ministry proactively work together with local government around that forward strategic planning?
Well, I could probably summarise the first question in relation to when was the last time our policy was reviewed. We recently had our 100th year anniversary for our school transport assistance policy. So to give some context there, 3.2 kilometres and 4.8 kilometres comes from the old 2 miles, 3 miles, or respectively. And quite simply, that's how long we've been operating under these transport criteria and policy. Why is a good question. But that is because of the amount of spend that the ministry has for school transport assistance, it is something that Cabinet and the likes would need to investigate and would need to put a minister forward to review what that would look like and what that would mean for a monetary spend. So I won't speculate why we haven't done it yet, but if that just gives some context for the distance requirements there. In terms of the climate change, and do we have a lens over that? Not yet. Our services operate for kind of like an hour to maximum of 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, twice a day, 5 days a week. And our impact on climate change is great because we reduce the number of caregivers that use their vehicles. But in terms of our overall contribution, we're a relatively small player in that regard. But that doesn't mean that this won't come for us. I think that there are other priorities for the government at this point in time, and we are in no doubt that we will be asked the question in the future, though. In relation to how does the ministry work with other local government bodies. So in terms of the future proofing and the planning and residential development, we have what's called a network team for each local office, and they are the ministry's representative on growth, for example, with Hamilton City Council and the Peacocks development, we have a dedicated person who sits in at those meetings to give a ministry lens around how we are going to deal with the growth of students in an area over a particular time. And they regularly review how we structure our schooling within the Waikato and around the country really for these dedicated teams. And they have triggers in terms of role growth that may move schools up and down a priority list for enrolment zone implementation, the building of new schools or the expanding of an existing school. I'm not part of that team, so I can only give a high level overview about what that looks like. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you, Reid. Any other questions? Yes, sorry, Matt.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation today. It's really insightful and, good to have that level of understanding. There's been a lot of concern recently about school attendance numbers. And I wondered if you've got any comment about the contribution that your transport service makes to school attendance numbers in general. And I guess then what impact it might have should you withdraw some of those services, sites or areas?
This is probably more of a James question, but I'll try my best. In terms of a national view, we've only done one study, I suppose, or I use study in inverted commas because it wasn't really, but we had one instance down in the South Island where we had proposed to remove a service, and it was proposed to us that that would have an impact on attendance and engagement for that particular school. So we decided to I believe we decided to leave the service in for a period of time to gather data around who uses the students and who uses the bus and who attends schools, and then we removed the service and tracked that attendance and engagement. And from that one, and I'll make that clear, it was one instance of where we tracked this data. There was no correlation between the bus and the attendance of students. And I wish I could tell you what the area was. I believe it was Nelson. It was all over the media. But that is an example that comes to mind in relation to attendance. That may not be reflective everywhere, but that is just one instance where we have the factual information to be able to share that.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, then you Reid for your presentation and here and presented in front of us. So we've got a resolution here that we report school transport assistant policy and services be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Rodney, and a seconder. Thank you, Philip. All those in favour? Those against? Carried.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, our next item on the agenda, we've got Angus online for KiwiRail network update. Are you there, Angus?
I am. Sorry for not being there in person. The wind in Wellington yesterday was as extreme as you may have read. I wasn't at all surprised to get the New Zealand text last night.
Right, Angus, we'll let you carry on with the presentation.
Thank you. Am I sharing my screen, Dave, or have you got it?
We're just sorting out the IT there, Angus. Ready to go, Angus.
Great. Look, I was asked to give an update around how the delivery of the FY23 Rail Network Investment Program went and a couple of other items. It's timely to do that now, given we've actually obviously finished the last financial year, and I think I've set up a steady arrangement this time in the cycle to give the RTC a bit of a local update on what happened with the ARNIP. So if we go to the next slide. the broader point is that the ARNIP itself is focused on maintenance and renewals. It's not all of the large improvements that can happen and tend to be funded separately. Most of those improvements are really major projects like what's going on just north of Hamilton with the extension of Auckland's electrified rail network from Papakura down to Pukekohe. This is the core BAU of the network for maintenance and renewals. There is a heavy focus on renewals in particular because we're in a process or a program of catch up after underinvestment over a sustained period of decades. So that's where the attention is going at the moment. In terms of Waikato and Bay of Plenty, which we view as one single region for our purposes, $88.6 million of renewals into the current 3-year triennium of investment. So what does that mean? It just means that very old culverts that sit underneath the rail network are being ripped out and replaced with new ones with larger pipes that mean that in flooding events it is less likely to result to have a situation where our corridor results in flooding to our neighbours, and that flooding results in washouts, which means that our network is unreliable. So we're trying to fix all of those things by replacing these old assets, and we're making good progress in doing that. If you go to the next slide, the focus for delivering this is iterative. We're not going to do everything in a day. It's the analogy of the oven as opposed to the light switch. Turn it on, takes a while to heat up, and there is a massive program required. I'll draw your attention just again to the renewals piece being the orange on that graph. That is where the focus and the attention is going over the course of our ARNIPs. The ARNIPs are set just like State Highway program, just like the local road program, in 3-year chunks. We're currently in the last year, so it's all nicely lined up with the rest of the land transport system. In terms of scale, these aren't huge dollars by comparison to the rest of the transport total spend. So 1.2 billion this triennium, next triennium it's 1.3, and after that 1.8. We aren't seeing or proposing major escalation that goes beyond that point. It's a steady state of investment. Over time, we'd expect to see less on renewals and more on maintenance. You know, the balance or proportion rather starts to shift over time because you get over that hump of renewal and you've just got a network that you're looking after. Next slide, please. So in terms of Central North Island, very good progress. So 7.5 kilometres of rail was entirely renewed during that period. I think in the last financial year it was 90 kilometres. So overall nationwide, 7 kilometres of sleepers replaced, 8 turnouts replaced, 4 level crossing tracks upgraded, and 2 made active. So there is a constant program of renewals occurring across the Central North Island. Bridges got replaced, some very old assets that it can be a bit of a worry are getting ripped out and replaced with brand new, and they'll be in place for 50, 60 years. Next slide, please. In terms of what's happening this year and the last year of the ARNIP, similar scale of work, more bridges that get replaced, more level crossing renewals, more turnouts getting renewed, and a larger program of rail renewals as well. Same thing for civils, with more culvert renewals, particularly out on the East Coast and particularly beyond Mount Maunganui, where the focus has been, that was always intended to be given a heavy look in the latter part of this ARNIP period. You know, the focus first was go on the Golden Triangle and then start to shift your way out. So there is a clear prioritisation point there. Next slide, please. It's also asked us to give an update around kind of where are things going in the next triennium period and what's the so what point for the Waikato. So first point is decision rights for what goes into the maintenance and renewal programs for rail sits squarely with our board and the Minister of Transport. So unlike other parts of the land transport system where Waka Kotahi's board has large says over it, and in our case it is direct between our board and the Minister of Transport. That reflects the funding flows for how the ARNIP is paid for. So sort of minority of costs in the ARNIP are paid for through the hypothecated funds in the NLTF being road user charges, fuel excise duties and track user charges. The majority of it comes through a budget top-up, so reflecting that the decision rights for what goes in the program and what's the approved set of activities sits directly with the Minister. That decision point happens by 30 June next year, so it's all lined up with your RLTPs and the National Land Transport Plan process. In terms of your RLTP, we actually are using your last submission as the example of best practice across the country when we're going out to other regions to say, this is what it really looks like for a region to say, these are our priorities for rail, this is how it contributes to our broader transport strategy. And what I mean by that, I mean you guys went heavy on the value of rail when it is reliable and when it is resilient. The value of it as a asset utilisation proposition, because in the end it's all about capacity across all modes. You can't rely on just one. You need to get the best out of everything. So we're using yours as a good example. So more of that, please, would be wonderful. Longer term, I think for the sort of the big picture stuff on the very large projects, it's largely all in Auckland. And don't be too worried about that if you're looking at it from a Waikato perspective. It's in your interest to be investing in Auckland because that's where the pinch points are in the network. When you think about freight flows from Tauranga passing through Ruakura and getting up to Auckland, the pinch points are always where it is busiest. It's busiest in Auckland because we've got a very busy metropolitan network up there that's very important. So what are some options to deal with that? Well, the first priority for both us and Auckland Transport for rail is building the third and fourth main lines in the southern corridor in the Auckland network, which is where Te Huia runs and where the freight trains run as well. We need that because we're getting to a point where the train frequencies required in Auckland are just going up. And in order to have more space, you literally need more space. We're building a third main line right now between Whitty and Key Park. It's one small section right in the middle of the city, but what we're proposing is that it needs to be much further down, pretty much the entire length from Whitty down to Pukekohe, and a fourth main line in particular sections of it. It just gives the ability for the network to grow. Other options there around the Avondale to Onehunga link. The primary beneficiary of that is actually Auckland passenger flows, but there is some freight flows which are of relevance to Waikato because it means that the through flows in Auckland from North Port all the way down to Port of Tauranga would benefit from that, as you're not having to go through the very busy city centre. Auckland's level crossing upgrades as well are key because that's what gives you the reliability piece, and it also is just needed from a safety perspective because you want fewer interactions between road and rail. And then there is the electrification bit. So I spoke about this at the last RTC because it was after the budget. The government set aside $10 million for KiwiRail to press ahead with detailed engineering designs and a detailed business case for electrification. The focus at the moment is narrowing it down, but I've said this before, you don't have to be too bright to work out that you follow demand, and demand on the network outside of our existing electrified parts of the network point you squarely in the direction of the Golden Triangle. So as I said earlier, we're extending it from Papakura down to Pukekohe already. The next piece there would be to get it down to Te Rapa. That would see Auckland's electrified network extend right down to Palmerston North. The point after that would be to go from Te Rapa right out to Mount Maunganui, which would see the electrification of the Golden Triangle. So we've started the work on that. We are required with that funding to report back to ministers by 30 June 2025. So that's an exciting opportunity for us. Next slide, please. Just to make a point, we're all under funding pressures. There has been pretty high inflation in the last wee period. The cost of rail, I can tell you, is 39% up. The cost of sleepers is 22% up. So there is large pressure that exists in our place, and just like everybody else, we have to find a way to make it work. So we are going through the process as we develop ARNIP 2.0, which is the program of activities between 2024 and 2027. And hopefully it should make sense to people that the areas that we'll put all of our focus will be in those areas where the lines are busiest, where the safety critical need is highest, and where the asset condition requires a renewal to occur. What we won't be doing is doing a million different things all in every part of the country. We have to be really specific and laser-like in our focus for where we can spend those funds. And if we don't have enough to be able to spread around, clearly it results in us having to do deferrals. And if we've got deferrals of renewals, it means that you end up having to do some operational decisions around how the network is used, which means you'd expect to see some speed restrictions in places. Now, for Waikato and Bay of Plenty, I wouldn't expect to see that level of change happening in the next couple of years, just simply because you're in part of the country where the demand on the network is highest. For freight flows, Golden Triangle is a huge portion of use on the network, and you're also in an area that's proximate to Auckland. But just making that point out there because we do have to be real about the impact of inflation. Next slide, please. I was also asked us to give an update on how Te Huia is going. So obviously a few months ago, we had the issues with the regulator requirements issuing a Section 28 notice. That was revoked over a month ago. We met the safety requirements that the regulator had, and we've been going good guns since then. I've been keeping an eye on the performance stats from the team, and it's been pretty good. So that's good. That's all great. You may be aware that we went through a process with the regulator to shift to what's currently a double locomotive consist, so a train with a locomotive at both ends, pushing and pulling, to a carriage-led train. When we did the refurbishments years ago, we had them set up so that we would have the ability to do this, but it required a change in a variation rather to the safety case for Te Huia. That has been approved by the regulator. The expectation is that we'll shift over to that consist in the next few weeks. So you'll start to see Te Huia running along with a carriage at the front and a locomotive at the back. So it's what it does for you guys is it means that we can have more efficient uses of the 3 locomotives that you're contracting from us. And it opens the opportunity to run some additional services if you guys wanted us to with as service provider. That's in a good place. So we're ready to go in terms of safety variations. The bit that had held it up, as you may remember from a few months ago, is our ability to put the locomotive engineers or drivers into place to run those additional services was incredibly limited. We had about twice as many people leave than we had factored for the last couple of years post-COVID, and we had already factored in a very high assumption that people would be going off and moving over to Sydney and other parts of the world. So we've got about 82 people who are currently in training as locomotive engineers. The issue a few months ago is that we were pretty concerned that we wouldn't be able to have enough to be able to run additional services until June next year. But we said that we'd give the Waikato region an update in October. What I can tell you is it's in a pretty positive place. There's a meeting with officials later this week just to talk around when things might be able to happen. So I don't want to preempt that, but it's in a positive place. And the last piece there, and it was noted earlier in Nigel's update on the GPS, is that there has been a new activity class proposed in the draft, which would fund the ongoing services for Te Huia, or co-fund it rather. But it also opens up the option for co-funding of business cases for additional services. And Bay of Plenty RTC last week agreed that they will be putting in funding for a business case in their RLTP for next time around. So there's some positive moves there and some no shortage of interest, I suppose, in this part of the country. And last slide, please. Bill also asked me just to give an update on how the rail network rebuild is going in Auckland. It's going really well. So the Southern Line renewals have already been completed. Oh, sorry, I should start by saying what it is. There is a major program of work going on in Auckland right now, as you'll be aware if you've tried to catch a train and found a bus turned up instead. Then we're doing that in a program of stage closures of the network so that we can have huge renewals occurring in that part of the world. We are literally lifting up the entire network, the entire track infrastructure right down to the ground, re-leveling right at the base, putting down brand new ballast, putting down brand new rail in different places, putting down new sleepers the whole way along. It is a huge program of work, and it's all about making that city reliable and resilient and ready for when the City Rail Link comes through. The whole game in Auckland is with the City Rail Link is to get more frequent trains running as a consequence of that wonderful new efficiency that infrastructure provides. But you can't do it without a resilient and reliable network beyond that point. So huge work is going on there. Te Huia, of course, has been affected by it, but because it's a through train, it has the choice to go either east or southern. So it is still running. Very big program. We had to balance it all with FIFA, which we were delighted to do, and 120,000 people of all of the people who went to FIFA games in Auckland got there on the train. So it was just a wonderful, seamless process. And given the amount of work that's going on up there, it's a real credit to the team. So that's going well. Stage 2 is on schedule. Stage 3 will be starting next year. And there's some announcements happening in the next wee while about the level of work that'll come through that. That's probably the end from me, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Angus. Very in-depth report, and thank you for that. Got some good news in there, especially for our region. Any questions, Philip?
Oh, was Angela before
Oh,
me?
Angela.
Okay, thanks, Angela. Just a couple of things, Dave. Really comprehensive report, thank you. Just regarding your renewals program, and what happens to all the old materials like the sleepers and the bridge supports? I mean, we've recently removed an old bridge in Karakia, and there were a number of timber bearers out of old hardwood that we donated to our local college, and they've got a program in place to design and build a number of bench seats for the local community, things like that. Do you have similar processes for, utilising all those old timber bearers and the like?
So yes, we do. In some places, our sleepers get reused to provide supports for some of our other structures. That might sound a bit shocking, but it's actually very common. Has been well used practice in rail systems across the world. So we do reuse a lot of what we've got. What we don't reuse, we tend to sell. I'm not aware of any programs that we might have for donations, but I can check in with people about that because it would be an interesting thing to look at.
Yeah, well, our college is quite forward thinking, and they've built a number of houses. Local kids, they've got a local builder that comes in and they do a process in place where they just go through that whole stage process.
Yeah,
which is great.
I know that. I mean, in our case, most of the assets that we take out are steel and wood sleepers. So steel obviously has a resale value, which we'll always want to make use of, given we desperately needed purchasing more of it. And there is a strong level of demand from sleepers. I'd be, if I asked for a show of hand, I wouldn't be surprised if someone put theirs up as to anyone who's got a sleeper currently in their garden.
Great. Hey, I just had one more question too. Just now with the new thing about we make fence posts out of plastic, is there an opportunity for sleepers to be made out of the same product?
Out of plastic? Sorry, is that the
Recycled
question?
plastic.
We're currently using concrete in most of the replacements. In some areas, wood is the right way to go still. We're not using plastic as an option there. I'm not an engineer, but there's members of my teams who would be able to give me a very detailed explanation for that, and I can provide that to you if you'd like it.
Angela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Angus, I just wanted to say thank you for the constructive way that KiwiRail worked with our staff here at Waikato Regional Council and Waka Kotahi as well, to resolve all the recent issues with Te Huia. Yeah, we couldn't have come to a resolution so quickly without all that cooperation between the partners, so thank you for that. And also providing that update about the locomotive engineers. Yeah, I look forward to seeing where those conversations go and yeah, providing some extra services for interregional rail and moving forward. Also, on another note, conversations with the Bay of Plenty and interregional passenger connections going that way as well. That's really positive that they have got that in their RLTP as well. So just hoping that we will strengthen that with ours as well. And you mentioned FIFA up in Auckland. Yeah, I took some of my kids up and we purposely drove to a train station and jumped on the train and headed on in, and it was incredibly seamless and lots of people on buses as well. So overall, I think the whole PT uptake for that event was really well orchestrated. So yeah, thank you to KiwiRail staff and all those involved in that one. And just lastly, yeah, what you're doing through the whole Golden Triangle and making it more resilient and the electrification is so positive. Yeah, the future is looking really bright for our freight and logistics and hopefully passenger rail as well moving forward. So yeah, thanks for the update, Angus. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. There are no more questions. We've got a resolution here that the report KiwiRail network update be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, James, and a seconder, Maxine. All those in favour? Those against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, we'll head on to the last item on the agenda today, and it's David with Waka Kotahi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shall I just kick straight into it?
Yep.
Okay, so as usual, I'll take the report as read, but work through the presentation that's up on the screen, which touches on pretty much everything in the report anyway. Just wondering if Lee is online. No, okay. I was hoping Lee McKenzie, our future transport manager, might join us to talk about the Innovation Fund, because you'll get a much more fulsome explanation from her than you will from me. But nevertheless, we'll kick on. So first slide, we have an Innovation Fund. It is essentially $15 million contestable fund, the purpose of which is to try and engage industry in coming up with novel ways of addressing transport challenges in New Zealand. We're into round 3, so we've had 2 rounds. It's worked quite well, but one of the things that was lacking, and those of you that sort of came to our stand at Local Government New Zealand will know that I badged you senseless about this. One of the things that was lacking in the last couple of rounds was input from local government in terms of what are the problems, what are the challenges that you can see at small scale and large scale for your places in terms of transport. And one of the things we really want to do is get your suggestions and feedback about what the challenges we might set are. So what we're going to do is set those challenges and essentially go out to the wider industry and other providers, so iwi groups, etc., community groups, and say, look, there's $15 million here. Here's some challenges. If you have got some ideas about things that we could trial, and that's a really important word, this is not ongoing funding. This is, let's try something, see if it works. And if it does work, then let's look at what ongoing funding looks like. And if it doesn't work well, Kate Pai, you have to try some things to know. So go to the next slide. There's 5 key assessment criteria, and once we've set those challenges, and essentially they get, out of 10 points, how close is that proposal to achieving that? So innovation, we want some innovative solutions. We don't want same old, like here's something that worked here, let's apply it there. We actually want some innovative solutions. Obviously strategic fit. So we now have a GPS. We've made some submissions to that GPS, but essentially that gives you an idea of what the strategic outcomes are looking at. Is it likely to succeed? And more importantly, is it scalable? So what we don't want to see are very, very local solutions that won't, be able to apply widely. Is there a clear approach and a plan? And is there a engagement in a Māori community sense? Next slide. The second round was pretty successful. So there were 90 applicants. and 15 applications of those got approved to go forward. $3.7 million was spent. So out of that $15 million, 3.7 was allocated. And the big three were, the three criteria or challenges, if you like, were making roadworks safer for workers and road users. And there were some quite innovative digital solutions that were, and remote sensing solutions that were trialled. And at least one of those is going forward for further investment because it was quite successful, using proximity cameras to ensure that workers and people on sites were safe, reducing the impact of increased freight in urban environments, and improving safety and efficiency for people using different modes of transport in the same space. So that's that. And the picture on the screen is a classic where you've got walking and cycling, and there's limited space. How do we improve safety in those areas? Out of those 90, funding, some of them will probably come back in the next round. But round 3, what we really want is feedback from local government about what you're seeing in your places, and some ideas. I've already spoken to Len Salt, for example, about how he's got some ideas about how we might reduce travel from Whitianga around to Hahei, because everyone drives, and there's currently a ferry, and could we do some cool innovative things there? That needs a bit of work, to be honest, but those are the kind of ideas that we're looking for. So really, this is a challenge to you guys and your organisations to say, hey, if you've got some ideas, fire them through, please, and we'll take it from there and put that out to the wider agency. We've had a few come through from the last round who were unsuccessful, who've come back and said, actually, yep, thanks for the feedback about the last round, but actually we've had to think about it, and here's some changes we'd quite like to make. And one of those is actually going to be funded as a safety tool outside of this, because actually the idea was damn good. It just didn't have enough shape when they first applied. So, it's a pretty cool opportunity. I know $15 million is not very much, but it's enough to test. And then, as I say, if those ideas have some merit, they may well get funded in the long term. Is there a next slide? I don't think there is. No, Kapai. So just wanted to float that. Any questions? If you go on our website and just type in Innovation Fund, it's there. There's pages of information. There's also some key contact details. And if you don't want to do that, just send me an email, and I'll fire it through.
So David, just on that, what was there a main reason why only those few passed the line? Like, did they have a common denominator, or was it innovation? Was it safety? Because obviously safety has been mentioned quite a lot.
As much as anything, it was because the amount of funding that was available, trying to make that 15 million spread, but also trying to use it for innovations that are readily applicable now. So there were some quite cool ideas, but there were probably things that wouldn't be deliverable for 10 or 15 years. And what we're looking for is stuff that could be uptaken and delivered relatively quickly. So, for example, the road worker alerting solution that I spoke about monitors proximity of vehicles and people, and creates an alert system. That was a $100,000 investment. It's been very well received and probably will get invested in for future. There were some other innovations, testing dynamic loading zones, for example, to optimize the use of curb space in really tight urban environments. Now, 168,000, it's got some merit. It needs a bit more work after testing. They'll go away and do that testing, and they may come back again and say, hey, look, now we've worked the bugs out of this and we think it will work. So it was really just a case of how much money was available. They're quite variable, to be honest. When I looked at what got funded, there is no theme. They're just really cool ideas that have got that address those 3 challenges. So just to be clear, what we're asking you for is, what challenges should we put up? as opposed to don't send us a whole lot of ideas and go, hey, I've got this really cool idea, but what challenges should we be putting up? In Len's case, I would probably frame that as how do you manage effectively high demand, high seasonal demand from tourism, for example, or tourism in a public transport sense when you can't run that all year round, but over summer. Right. Yep. All right. So
just before you go on, sorry, Chair. You talked about a $15 million fund. Is that over a multi-year timeframe?
it's over the 3 years that it's year one, year two. Now we're into year three.
And so you're underfunding the first year. You're expecting a whole lot
There's a
more?
fair bit of money available still to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
some trials. Yeah. Okay. National updates. So these are all spelt out in quite a bit of detail in the report, but really importantly, it's the final year of the 21-24 NLTP. One of the key things for us is we are looking for early indications of where our partner agencies are not going to be able to complete activities that are in the NLTP. And the reason for that is we still have time to reallocate funding and minimise the amount of money we carry forward into the next NLTP. It would be tragic if we didn't spend 100% of what we've got in this round. So please, if you can feed that back to you. Our investment advisors are working with yours on this, but it's handy that you have a governance level understanding of that need. Next slide. So the upcoming NLTP, so you've all seen that the GPS has been released. Submissions closed on the 15th of September. We are obviously going back for some further conversations with Ministry of Transport based on those submissions and feedback, and that'll take a little while. But in the meantime, one of the things we put forward, the big deal, I suppose, other than our submissions, was the State Highway Improvement Plan. And so we're still working on that with Ministry of Transport to ensure that we have got a really good investment strategy in that space, and it includes Telephone Road, Eugene. Next slide. Just an update on the FAR rates. So all of your councils will have received letters advising of your renewed FAR rate for 24-27. 24 road controlling authorities got an increase in the last round. Nobody got a reduction, and 54 remained the same. You'll know where you are in that mix. And those FAR rates will apply for the 24-27 NLT period. Next slide.
Sorry, David, just on that, on the FARs, like some roads around the country, do they get even up to 90 or like in the Waitomo?
85 is the highest,
Yep.
And that is Chatham Islands. On the mainland, I'm pretty sure it's Portuguese has the highest because it's based on deprivation. Portuguese at 75%.
What's a Waitomo then?
Thought
they were pretty up there
Waitomo
as
was
well.
quite high.
75%.
75.
Awesome.
There's a few in the 60s in our region, and the majority are at 51%. Sorry, I don't have the list. In fact, I've got a link here, but when I click on it at the moment, it tells me our website's down for maintenance. So terrible timing. But your staff will know what it was. Interim State Highway Speed Management Plan. So you'll all be aware that we've had quite a few conversations around this. We were asked to reduce the scale of that some time ago as a matter of priority, top 1%, as well as schools, etc. So the current interim speed management plan, 23-24 through to the end of the financial year, includes 267 speed limit changes around schools. So this is the statutory requirement to now reduce speed limits at schools. 10 around marae, quite a few of those actually are in our region. 16 intersection speed zones and 59 kilometres of urban state highway speed reductions, 87 kilometres of rural state highway speed reductions. Again, as I said, in the top 1% of the most dangerous state highway sections. That doesn't include the speed reductions, for example, that we've put in around State Highway 25. That's a response to what we've called an emergency situation with the I shouldn't say the bridge being out, with State Highway 25A being out. And another 47 kilometres of new or changed speed limits on the remaining state highway network. That's nationally. It's a relatively small program to what we had originally. That original program is still there, and we'll just roll that through into the next NLTP process. Next slide, reshaping streets. Again, your teams are well aware of this, but the reshaping streets is a new package of rule changes through the land transport plan legislation to enable road controlling authorities in urban environments particularly, but Rodney, rural environments as well, if you so see it fit, just to make it easier for you to make modifications to make your streets safer. There were identified in the previous set of rules quite a few barriers to you doing things. You had to jump through quite a few hoops, and actually, in spite of that process, the outcomes were almost always what had been asked for in the first place. So this is really about removing that process and saying, hey, let's make it easier and quicker to enable people to move around more safely in your areas, and enable you to make modifications without huge amounts of fuss, and enable you to trial things as you see fit. On a similar vein, next slide, our regulatory strategy has been updated, essentially to reflect the recent changes in legislation and government strategy. Principally, the big changes, making it easier to engage with us, enhancing monitoring of the transport system so that we can do better planning, forward planning particularly, coordinating our regulatory levers so that we are using our non-regulatory tools as well at the same time, rather than often they've been in conflict, and updating what we deem to be good practice in terms of the transport network. If you want more information, jump on our website, just type in Tuaki Tumaia or type in regulatory strategy. Both will take you to the website. There's quite a lot of information on there. Next slide. That's it, I think, for the national. Yeah, that's it from a national point of view. So I'll pause there if there's any questions about any of those things. Talk about our place.
Oliver.
Kia ora, David. Just wondering about reshaping streets, and has there been consultation with the disability community around the guidance there and stuff?
Yes, there has been, in fact, some of the barriers that were identified to change were from feedback from that community, because often there's a necessity to trial things first. It was interesting, the questions earlier about the buses and things. You know, I'm aware that there are some situations, and we had that with Glenview, for example, where bus might kneel down, but actually the pavement's 10 centimetres lower, and so it doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter that the bus kneels. Doing some quick changes to fix those things rather than having to go through long processes is what this is.
I'm just interested in the shaping the streets or whatever.
Yep.
Does that mean we've got, say, like on the state highway too? Like, I'm thinking, not the state highway, only local streets.
You still have to come through.
Oh, yeah.
Waka Kotahi. Yeah.
I was thinking about annual Christmas or Anzac parades and that main street, which is the state highway. You can't.
Still the same process. Most of those restrictions are around safety and journey management. So as opposed to making longer term changes to how a streetscape works or how a streetscape feels. So yes, same process.
The questions, David, carry on with
so in terms of local updates. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but speed surveys. So in anticipation of implementing the safety cameras, we are going to be conducting some speed surveys using cameras, using not the ultimate safety cameras, but using cameras nationally. We will be doing the Waikato part on State Highway 2 Pokeno to Mangatawhiri starting in October, I think. Yeah, in October for 7 days. The data collected is just numbers of vehicles and speed. So we won't be using it for any enforcement. We won't be using it to identify vehicles. It's simply a case of how many vehicles are coming through this corridor, and what does the speed profile look like. We're doing this in multiple locations in Auckland, South Island, Waikato, Manawatu, and the purpose is, as much as anything, proof of concept for the speed camera, for the safety cameras when they are implemented. It doesn't mean we're going to put safety cameras at State Highway 2, Pōkeno to Mangatawhiri, but it does mean that that is an area that we've identified as a pretty high risk area. The speed limit there is currently 90. We know there is quite a high level of non-compliance in that area. We know that it remains quite a high residual safety issue. So that's why we're targeting that area. So yeah, be in place for 7 days over October, and I'll let you know how the data plays out once that's done.
David, have you been given any info on what the police collect nationally on the grid, or have you got any idea of what speed cameras could earn Waka Kotahi to put back into roading?
No. No, I don't. I mean,
this could be a huge game team if it all goes back into the infrastructure and resilience.
Yep. So currently that is reinvested, and the intent is that it would continue to be reinvested. But I could find out if you really want to know, but I have no idea what the current take from speed cameras is.
So does your budget decrease with that, or is that an extra that you're anticipating that you go into? Because there's, when you look at infrastructure and resilience, especially with the weather events, we've talked about this.
Yeah. It's not a huge amount of, when we're talking about investing billions of dollars in road maintenance, it's not even close to in that league. So it's, it's a substantial, I know it's a substantial amount of money, but it's not big enough to have a huge impact on those kind of budgets. My understanding is currently it's reinvested back into safety programs. But I can find out some more detail if you like for a future meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Claire.
I was interested in the safety cameras and whether or not you're going to run into that privacy issue that was flagged in Australia. I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but yeah, is that the kind of framework that we're going to end up with?
Yeah, so the safety camera program has been going for 18 months, and part of, or might even be 2 years now, part of the reason for that is that there are a whole lot of privacy and statutory challenges when you are introducing the kind of technology that they represent. I mean, they can tell me the color of your eyes. The camera technology is phenomenal. So there are limitations in New Zealand as to what you can use that data for and what you can capture. And so that process is being worked through and has mostly been worked through now. And the functionality that is allowed to be used is been quite tightly managed for that very purpose, because, yeah, as you say, overseas there were some challenges around how those were used. We have had quite a few local authorities say to us, oh, could we use them for X, Y, and Z? And up till now, with few exceptions, the answer has been not really, because that's, statutorily this is what they are for. And obviously from a police point of view, there's lots of potential for these things, but there are statutory privacy limitations in New Zealand that we have to respect.
See?
Thanks, David. Good to have that clarification at this stage. city is one of those territorial authorities that wants a bit more use of those, especially around red lights, etc. But question. You've talked about 2 points. Those cameras, have they got the ability to be able to not just record the speed at that site, but across those points and the speed, therefore, of the average sort of travel time, etc.?
Yes. So the Pocono to Mangatawhiri survey is deliberately being conducted in a way that would inform implementation of a point-to-point rather than an instantaneous camera. Yep.
And I would imagine that at this stage you're not going to signpost any of that, but if it's put down as a permanent thing, is there a requirement?
Yes.
Motorists.
There's a limited requirement, but we will post signs and things. So yeah, absolutely. The point is to slow people down. So if a warning sign slows someone down, marvelous. If they don't slow down, and they get caught out by the camera, well, they'll get a reminder and it'll be a financial one. But we'd prefer that, the warning sign did the job. Yeah. So yes, there is that site, particularly if it was implemented, but other sites. The expressway, for example, lends itself really nicely to point-to-point between on-off ramps, for example.
The Auckland tunnels, I don't think they have, do they? And they're point to the underground tunnel.
Just trying to think if they do have warnings.
I don't remember seeing.
Yeah, I
just know
haven't
that
paid
they're
enough
in there
attention to know. I just slow down to 80, hit the cruise
gotta slow
control
down.
and let it go. But yeah, they are. There is point-to-point potential there.
Yep. Kevin.
Yeah, just a bit of clarity around the funding, David. My understanding is currently just goes into the consolidated fund and disappears into Treasury.
Yeah, I don't know enough about how that is distributed.
No, well, wearing a hat from a former life, I've had some involvement with it. Yes, it is. It did. You say the intent is that it gets reinvested into road
Into the
safety
safety program.
initiatives.
Yep.
It would be great to have some certainty as to how that will work and where it goes, because I'm getting quite a few locally about that, whether that is a contestable fund or whether it's up to the discretion of whoever at the Waka Kotahi, whether, heaven forbid, we might have some ability to dip into that. That would be really helpful.
Just writing myself a note.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Kevin that money did go back to the consolidated fund and it was just evaporated like steam. But I would encourage those cameras not to be signposted. I don't know if you remember when we first got speed camera cars, there used to be signs on the side of the road, camera car operating, blah, blah, blah. Those have disappeared by and large. And I disagree, David. If the sign makes them slow down, it's not quite good enough because they'll slow down during going through the area where the signs are relevant, is to snap them. And I've been the recipient of a couple of those, so I can actually say this. You really learn when you get, why are New Zealand police writing to me? What's that about? The financial penalty is far better than having signs up where they just slow down when they go through there. Yep. So that's a friend. Have they developed that technology so that they can get motorcycle number plates as well now? Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that last question.
The answer has 3 letters in it. Okay. Next slide, maintenance and operations. So we spoke about this a little bit before, where we've had the horrible year 23-24 has been absolutely diabolical. Those of you that have been around the table a while will probably recall that before the 23-24 season, I came along and went, it's marvellous. We're going to have the biggest maintenance season ever. We're going to crack on and we're going to get lots and lots done. And then it started raining and it didn't stop. And so we've had a terrible, terrible, terrible summer. That said, July and August have actually been incredibly dry, much, much drier than average. And so that has meant that we've been able to get ahead of the summer program in terms of maintenance and operations, which is, no one saw that coming either. So the observant among you will know that there are a lot of road cones out there at the moment, and that is because we've basically tried to jump the gun in terms of the summer program. So this summer, our program, 450 lane kilometres of renewals to complete across the region, and that includes that pavement work that I spoke about before, not just sealing, but actually, and not dissimilar to Angus's point about some of these places with rail. It's similar with road. Some of these places you have to go down, redo the pavement itself, and then the seal. So it's going to be, hopefully, it's going to be a really big summer in terms of catching back up on that maintenance program, and we get the opportunity to do the whole lot. Across the country, we are aiming for 2,300 lane kilometres of maintenance and renewals. So it's a massive program. It's very, very optimistic. But all the forecasts at the moment are that we're going to have a long, hot, dry summer. So if you're a farmer, it's probably bad news. But if you're trying to maintain the roading network, it's great news. Yeah.
David, does the heat and conditions
it does pose
give
its
you
own
just
challenges.
as many potential problems?
For bitumen, to lay bitumen and pavement, the roading surface, you need 18 degrees minimum temperature. Otherwise, your seal doesn't bind. But yeah, you're right. Unfortunately, when you get up to that point where the tar starts sticking and things like that, you do start to get some surface issues. Those don't result in, well, mostly those are not structural damage issues. They're surfacing issues. But yeah, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
And so is there the ability to be able to, during the hot part of the day, not do the work and start up again, in the, I'm not that I'm advocating split shifts, workers, please don't.
It's not such an issue
get me on that.
it's not such an issue for laying the material. It's more of an issue of, when on those really, really hot days where the tar starts to get soft and you get shoving on corners and things like that, because it all sort of slides around it. So from actually doing the physical works point of view, not really an issue, but from how does the road hold up when it's really, really hot like that? Yeah, that can be a challenge.
Thanks.
We are working really hard over that summer period with our journey managers as well to try and minimise the sort of disruptions that will go. But one of the things we are going to have to do is closures for large periods of time. One of the things we've learned in the last couple of years is little short patches are very, very costly because you've still got to put in all your traffic management, etc. You're actually better just to close big sections of the road, do the whole thing once, and then get out of it. So that's something we'll have to manage very, very closely. Next slide. Cambridge to Piriti. So just an update. You'll see that we're still making progress on the safety infrastructure along Cambridge to Piriti network. We've put in the turnaround bay at Hydro Road, which was done really, really well, I have to say. Was completed on time. The contractor did a very good job. The communications was really good, and we managed to get it in and out with relatively low disruption. We are now moving on to Keeley's Reserve to build the next turnaround bay, and that's in anticipation of continuing the medium barrier work. You'll already notice that's closed. There's cones up and what have you, and same contractors doing that piece of work, so we're anticipating another good result. Stairway 129, the tenders have closed for that. We're currently just doing the review process, so back to the tenderers to negotiate on some of the detail around the contract, and we should be announcing the tenderer, the successful contractor rather, in mid-October, and hopefully we get some sods turned in November to get construction underway for that roundabout. And in terms of the longer term improvements for Cambridge to Piriti, so this is ultimately the bypass. We're in the process of going through the route protection process at the moment. So that's where we have to get resource consents in place, so that we can then require designation for the whole route. And then we go back and seek funding for the next phase. So that's progressing reasonably well at the moment. We've got hydrologists and ecologists and engineers crawling all over the site at the moment in anticipation of applying for those resource consents later this year. Okay, next slide. Recovery works. So in terms of nationally, the recovery works from cyclones have gone really, really well. State Highway 25A is the only piece of state highway network that is not connected anymore as a consequence of those events. So in every other instance, we've managed to restore connection, including in Hawke's Bay, which is pretty good news. State Highway 25A is a major, obviously, but underway, and I'll give you an update on that in a minute. What we've done on the wider 25 and 25A is completed what we're calling a resilient strategic response business case, which is what are the short, medium and long-term prevention works that are required on the Coromandel so that we kind of maximise resilience to these weather events. We know they're going to keep coming. We know that the Coromandel is really sensitive to them. And so this piece of work is really going through, or has done, a really good job of identifying those sites and those issues. It traversed 360 sites of concern on the Coromandel and looks at what the responses should be for those 360 sites so that we can minimise, first of all, the incidents occurring, but then if they do, when they do, maximising the response capability. So that business case is almost complete, and then once that has been endorsed by our board, we'll go through the funding process. And I've got to take my hat off to Thames Coromandel District Council for working so well with us. We've created a joint team of their staff and our staff, and it's been very, very successful, I think, as a model going forward. In terms of the recovery works, next slide. We're currently working at 86 individual sites on 25 and 25A. Ballpark cost $30 million to complete all of those works, excluding building the bridge. And that's things like retaining walls, seawall repairs, culvert replacements. One of the issues has been drainage. And so we've gone through and had a look at the whole network in terms of, is there adequate drainage at these sites to ensure you don't get water build-up, saturation, and then failure. It's probably going to take us another 12 months to complete. We have pulled forward as much of the program as possible for State Highway 25 into try and get the work done while the bridge is out, while 25A is out, so that, you know, when we do open that bridge, we're not then saying, oh, and by the way, the bridge is open, but there's roadworks 3 kilometres down the road while we try and repair State Highway 25A. As I said, we've installed temporary speed limits around the peninsula, and that's as much as anything because, one, there's been an increase in volume of vehicles going around the peninsula because you can't go across 25A, and that's created some safety challenges, but also it's meant that in some places the speeds that they're travelling with are no longer appropriate. You know, it's one thing to have one truck going through, but when there's 5 in a row, those speeds start to become an issue. 25A was included in the interim speed limit plan, but we've just put that on hold for a while for obvious reasons. And once we open it, we'll re-engage in that process. Next slide. So just, I guess, some vital statistics for you in terms of Taparahi Bridge. So construction's underway. It's a joint venture, McConnell Dowell and Fulton Hogan. I think we've started working the 2 10-hour shifts, so rolling shifts to keep that site open 20 hours a day. The bridge is 124 metres long, 3 spans. It's currently over 100 people working on the site and off-site. So we've got teams working in Hawke's Bay building the 1.2 metre high big steel I-beams that are going to go on top of this thing. They're working, that factory's working 24 hours a day to fabricate those beams for us. We took steel from the Tikatumi North Link site because they didn't need it for another 3 to 6 months, and used it for this project and ordered them some new steel. So hopefully that doesn't get delayed. We've got a dozen local businesses that are supplying goods and services for the workers that are up on the site, including there's a food truck come restaurant actually on the site that's been supplied by a whole lot of different cafes and things, so that there's food and what have you available pretty much 20 hours a day at the site. And we are, as I say, working to try and accelerate things. The piling, I'm going up there tomorrow to have a look, but the piling should be finished and the girders on mid-October. Those are the two milestones that we are most worried about in terms of timing. So I'll give you an example of how unpredictable that site is. The most recent piles that were done, which is, I think, the second lot of piles actually into the middle of the hole. One pile went down 15 metres, one went down 25 metres, and everybody was going, oh, this is great. And the next one went down more than 40 metres before they found rock, which they weren't expecting. So it's quite an unpredictable site, even with all the geotech survey that's been done. And those little things can throw you out a long way. So instead of taking a day to put down a pile, suddenly it takes 2 days or 3 days. Once the piles and the bridge girders are in place, most of the in-ground work is done, and then the risk of delay comes less. So we will do a review with the contractor then about expected timeframe for delivery. And then we will come back to the community with an updated ETA, if you like, in terms of delivery. We're holding our powder dry at the moment at end of March until that's done, because as you know, that 40+ metre pile demonstrates, we still got quite a lot of uncertainty about what might not happen at the time. But it's going really well at the moment. Next photo, next slide's just a photo. That's the site itself looking, I always get this confused, looking east. So the far end is the eastern end of the slide of the hole. The yellow machine there's the drill. So that augers in the pile casings, which are those big steel casings you can see there. And then the red and white thing next to it is a 100-ton crane that's been used to move everything around. Those platforms, so that platform you can see there, they're constructed cement mixed in with the local material to create a platform big enough to hold the cranes. And I think before they put the girders in place, those 100-ton cranes are going to move into place to 250-ton cranes so that we can lift the girders safely and place them, because they are enormous. There's been quite a lot of vegetation clearance up there as well. On those of you that have driven that road know how windy it is. In order to get the girders up, we've had to take out some vegetation so that as the girders go around the corner, they can actually cross the gullies and what have you, because they're so big. So it's going to be a bit of a interesting exercise when those go in. Next slide. There's just another photo that's sort of standing back on that eastern side, looking back towards the west. At the site, it's a lot tidier site than it was even a month ago now, and an incredibly busy site actually. So things are progressing reasonably well up there. And questions?
Thank you, David. Any questions? I would just like to say thank you for whoever put on that open day up there. I mean, it was professionally done and really good to see it, visually. I know I missed you and Len. You went on an earlier one because you were with the minister there.
Yeah.
But, huge. And it's kind of like a Lego. Once the piles are in, the bridge is virtually just, don't have to rely on concrete giant. It's just virtually bolting it together. So,
Yeah, the design is purposefully boring, is the way I would describe it. So we had a lot of people go, oh, this is an opportunity to create, a monumental structure and make it amazing. And we went, you know what? Let's just get it built. So it almost literally is a Meccano set. Once those piles are in place and the beams are on, as you say, Mr. Chair, it becomes a bolt together and then surface job.
James.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, David, just a couple of questions, real ones. The Pepe Bridge, because I'm a TCDC ratepayer as well, which is cool. It would be great to see that. But we've got the other one-lane bridge at the end of Tairua there.
Graham's Creek Bridge.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Yep.
If we remove that pressure point, it just ends up being worse there, I would presume. So is there plans to get to get that as a two-laner or not?
So Pepe Bridge is still on target for construction, or it's going through the process, consenting process at the moment, I think. The thinking is with Pepe Bridge, a very significant portion of the traffic is going to Tairua.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you lose quite a big volume of traffic in Tairua, and then no question, you'll probably move the bottleneck up a little bit, but it'll be much less than what it is at Pepe Bridge itself. In the long term, when we replace those structures, we will replace them with two-lane bridges.
Yeah.
But we won't be moving to replace them before their life is over. We simply don't have enough resources to carry on.
And I get that. So, no.
Yeah. So it will be replaced with a two-lane bridge when it is replaced.
And my other minor question was just that the Pitt Street stuff at Waharoa, is there going to be speed restrictions at the alterations of that?
The idea with the Pitt Street work is to actually get travellers to respect the current speed limit.
Yeah.
It's so hence the hard physical infrastructure. The challenge there is a lot of those vehicles are trucks, and Rodney will tell you if you have too steep an approach and too steep a decline, you just bang, bang, and whatever you're carrying gets jolted around. So from a construction point of view, trying to minimise that while still making it effective, if you know what I mean. But we'll have a look at the speeds after that's gone in place. But at the moment, it's really just trying to get people to respect the current speed limit.
No, that's cool. Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, David. Any other questions for David? If not, there's a resolution that the report Waka Kotahi cross-functional update be received. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, John, and a seconder. Thank you, Claire. All those in favour? Opposed? If not, carried. Thank you. Thank you to the staff, especially Phil's staff, all the hard work that they've put in, and the presenters, Reid, thank you. And lunch is served just next door. It's ready now, so yeah, quite. And we'll close with a karakia. Phil, thanks, Phil.
Unuhia mai te uru tapu nui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te hinaro, I te ara te takatū. Kua rā e rongo, e whakarea ake ki runga, kia tina, umi e hui e tāki e.
Let's close it.